All right. Well, welcome everybody to our May installment of our panel discussion series. We have an amazing panel of guests today. We have Lori Laitman, Grace Christus, and Shanelle Woods. And we are here today to talk about appreciation versus appropriation in vocal music. So I'm going to do a quick screen share so we can do some better introductions for everybody here. Just pull this up. Where did it go? Window. Not a Chrome tab. That's not how that's supposed to do that.
Tricky.
Hold on one moment.
Sorry, everyone. Now we're the ones who are having technology struggles.
Okay. Let's try that one more time. Share screen. I guess we'll just do it like this. Okay. Does everybody see a PowerPoint? Let me ask that.
Yes.
Okay,
all right.
Perfect. So here we go. So here's the ad that everybody probably saw. And first up, we have Lori Laitman, described by Fanfare magazine as one of the most talented and intriguing of living composers and a songstress extraordinaire. Lori Laitman has composed multiple operas, choral works, and over 300 songs, setting texts by classical and contemporary poets, including those who perished in the Holocaust. Her music is widely performed throughout the world and has generated substantial critical acclaim. The Journal of Singing wrote, "It is difficult to think of anyone before the public today who equals her exceptional gifts for embracing a poetic text and giving it new and deeper life through music." Her latest album, Are Women People, was just released by ASIS on May 27th. For more information, please visit www.artsongs.com. Wow, you really got quite the domain name claimed on that one.
I started early.
Well, welcome, Lori.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Next, we have Grace Tin-Yen Christus, who is the daughter of Chinese immigrants. Grace Christus degrees in piano performance from the George Peabody College for Teachers in Nashville, Tennessee, the Juilliard School in New York, and the Manhattan School of Music in New York. She has been teaching privately from Calliope Music Studio in her home in Aurora, Colorado since 1900. 1990.
I'm old enough.
Oh my goodness. Not quite that long. As a composer, she has written piano and vocal music inspired by Chinese traditions and arranges folk songs from all over the world at many different levels, which she shares on her Facebook page, Sing Me a Song of Your People. Her arrangements and compositions can be found on her website, jadepress.com, and on sheetmusicplus.com/Grace Christus. This September, she will be presenting a session on Chinese music, past and present, for the Denver Area Music Teachers Association Fall Course. Thank you for being with us, Grace.
Thank you.
All right, and sopranos Shanelle Valerie Woods has served on the voice faculties of both Charleston Southern University and Claflin University, taught for 5 years at Fame Performing Arts, and she is now the education coordinator for the Young People's Chorus of New York City. Shortly before the shutdown, Shanelle co-founded the Original Black Cabaret Society, a New York City production company dedicated to the education, preservation, and performance of Black musical theater works. As the closures progressed, she began the Ujima sessions, taken from the Kwanzaa principle, meaning collective work and responsibility, offering free voice lessons to students of color, thereby removing barriers of entry to arts education. She also began offering consulting on repertoire, studio diversification, and non-appropriative practices. In the fall, she will enter a graduate vocal pedagogy program and begin adjunct professorship at NYU, while continuing to fulfill her role at the Young People's Chorus. For future updates, please visit her website, ShanelleValerieWoods.com, and follow her on Instagram. So welcome, Shanelle.
And congratulations on your upcoming grad degree, your
Yeah.
next grad degree.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we are Graham and Stephanie Anduri. We are Sing for Your Lives. We offer empowered singer workshops, individual lessons, and empowered singer coaching sessions and masterclasses. We offer monthly panel discussions, and we delve into scientific research into the myriad ways that singing serves as a means of self-realization and societal rehabilitation. Thank you all for being with us today.
Right. Ultimately, we sing to save the world is what we like to say. And for more information, you can visit our website at singforyourlives.com. We are booking virtual and live workshop experiences. And we are also setting up a sponsorship program on our website soon. If you are interested in supporting the research that we are doing into the ways that singing can help save the world and how singing can be transformational in the lives of individuals, in communities, and for the whole globe. So without further ado, let's dive into this conversation. So we have some questions for you all.
The first question that we posed seems like the most basic one and the most foundational one. It is, how do you define appreciation and appropriation in terms of music? And is there a clear dividing line? Let's open the floor to Grace, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
I've been thinking about this, and I can think of a lot of places, particularly in classical music, where other cultures are explored and explored with a lot of respect. I mean, there's Debussy, and there's all the classical composers that have explored ragtime rhythms, though I know that as a classical piano teacher, we have, it's been hard for a lot of teachers to be able to teach Debussy's Golliwog Cakewalk or Le Petit Nègre, and it's because there's a kind of a colonial aspect to some of those pieces, in that it's always the colonial world's vision or way of looking at oppressed people, actually, to speak of it. But I think it's where you are drawing from another culture, and without a real appreciation of the background and the culture that it comes from, and you're only approaching it from a very stereotypical standpoint, as opposed to trying to explore another culture, trying to absorb another culture. I know that I have often written works that are in a particular cultural vein, and I do a lot of research before I do that. So that's kind of where I would draw the line.
So yeah, so basically, whether or not you are doing it out of a place of respect and appreciation is the word, but
of the culture.
Yeah, honoring the culture and doing your homework, doing the research to understand where does this really come from, and not just presenting it as a stereotype of that culture, essentially.
Though sometimes it's really hard to not do that when you are immersed in, shall we say, the oppressor culture. I mean, it's really hard to be able to say these things, but these are things that we have to look at nowadays, and we have to sometimes go back and reassess what has been written in the past.
Absolutely. I would say, as both performers and as composers, I would, I'm not a composer, but knowing the works of the composers who are on this panel, and knowing many of my friends who have composed, I think that's maybe even a bigger responsibility on the part of the composer, to make sure that we're getting it right, so that the raw material that the performer is working with doesn't necessarily lend itself to appropriation or to not honoring that culture fully.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Shanelle, what is your take on this?
Yeah, I totally agree. And one of the things that stands out to me is, Grace, you were mentioning it's kind of hard to even have the conversation sometimes when you're so steeped in the colonial culture. So even for myself as a woman of color, sometimes I have to go back and re-examine the lens through which I'm viewing things musically, because I understand that all of my training has been very Eurocentric, very Western, very classical. And so sometimes I might hear things that quote unquote should be related to me culturally. And then I go, okay, am I invalidating this existence in some way, or am I putting the wrong sort of judgment on this? So even in thinking about my own like definition between appropriation and appreciation, what does that mean? One of the questions that I came across in my own research and that kind of just changed the way I think about it was, are you being a traveler or a tourist? And this idea of exploration and how, you know, travelers appreciate things and they go and they're really trying to like steep themselves in the culture and learn, and just, you know, they have that sense of appreciation and honor, versus the more touristy approach where you might go look around, take a couple of pictures, borrow some things and go back home. You can put it aside again. And so that's just really kind of changed the way that I think about it. And I think if it comes down to anything that feels dehumanizing in any sort of way, then yes, I would label that as appropriation, versus where again you were trying to uplift or amplify, then we could put that in the appreciation category.
So I have a question about that. I think this is something that as a white performer, this is something that I have sort of been concerned about. Is it whether it feels authentic and honest and honoring to me or to my audience? Because where I know that I like every time, and I think Shanelle, I know you know this about me because we did grad school together, but when we're singing a piece of music, we're doing the research to understand and to honor the people who wrote it and to honor the tradition out of which it came. But if that is not understood by my audience, is it still appropriation, or how does that play in?
You know, I always think that's such a difficult question, and maybe it's one that can't even be answered here, because it's like, do I do it as a lecture recital sort of situation where I try to like get the audience to understand all the cultural context from whence this is coming, or should I just be satisfied with knowing for myself that I put in the work and did the research and talked to members of that community from who the music belongs? So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it, and it kind of depends on the context and the scenario.
Yeah, so in November of this past year, we had planned to do a faculty recital. The two of us and our colleague here at Colorado Mesa University had planned to do a recital of all music by African-American composers. And it got canceled because of illness, but we were hyper aware of our whiteness in that endeavor. And so we wanted to make sure that our audience received it in the way that we wanted them to receive it, that this was something that was meant to bring all of this music to light, or not, you know, bring this music kind of out of the what am I trying to say? Shadows. Yeah, it was music that had not been performed very much, or that a lot of people had not heard of. We had not heard of it until we found, you know, some obscure recordings of it. And so we ended up having a conversation with the Black Student Alliance, a group on campus, and to try to just have an open conversation with all of our students and with members of the BSA, that trying to figure out how can we do this in a way that is uplifting, that is respecting, that is honoring, and is not like we're the white saviors come to, you know, like fix racism or something. Yeah. And it was a really excellent conversation that we had with them. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do the recital because two of our colleagues fell ill. But shortly thereafter, we saw several other posts from other universities that were doing a similar thing, and they kind of got lambasted because it was like this all-white group of people singing all Black songs, and we're like, well, maybe let's hold off on this a little bit and kind of make sure that we're doing this for the right reasons, and that we're not just hopping on this bandwagon of like, hey, it's, you know, this year of trying to, you know, bring up civil rights and put civil rights forth again. But it's weird. There's some weird waters to try to test there.
Yeah, and I want to give Lori a chance to speak too. But in regards to that, because I remember that whole thing this summer. I think it was Oberlin, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, this is the worst poster ever." And when I'm thinking about these sort of things, I'm like, these Black composers weren't necessarily writing and saying like, we only want other Black singers to sing this music. They were writing because they were being excluded from other academic spaces, and they were saying, hey, we can do this too. And so I think, at least in the way that I interpret it, in their minds, they were just trying to be just as much a part of the canon as everyone else was. And so for me, it's never really an issue for non-Black singers to sing African-American art songs, because at the end of the day, they are art songs. The racial disparity didn't matter as much. It was just, a matter of academic exclusion. And then as far as how that, all went down this summer, I was like, I get it from a marketing angle too, though, because the face of it was not any POCs, right? And so I'm like, so in that case, it's a question of like, are we amplifying the composers or the performers, right? And so I can see it from both sides, but I just wanted to say and put that out there. I think everyone should sing everything in that regard,
Absolutely. Lori.
Yes. Hi.
Thoughts? Hi.
Yeah. So I agree with everything that Grace and Shanelle have said. I loved your traveler versus tourist. I think, appreciation values the work and its essence, and appropriation is just using it for other purposes, and it's a tricky thing. I mean, this may go into your next question that you had sent to us, but it's something I've grappled with in terms of, obviously I'm white, but I wrote a song cycle that the great countertenor Darryl Taylor had commissioned from me called Sable Pride, and it sets the work of the closeted gay Harlem Renaissance poet Countee Cullen, who is totally awesome. He's just an incredible poet. And I didn't feel like I was appropriating his poetry. I just was using his poems like I would use any other poem to try and tell his story, or illuminate his words through my lens, which is what any composer does. But because the second of the songs contains the N-word, it is an interesting question I've had. So far, it's only been sung by Black singers. And I think that a white singer could sing it if they felt comfortable, but it becomes very tricky waters to navigate. If a singer is singing, any singer has to just throw themselves in and try and become the composer, just as the composer has tried to become the poet, and so you have all of these multiple layers. I think it's okay for a white person to sing it as long as they felt comfortable, but it may be a case that this particular song cycle is best sung by African Americans. I don't know. In general, I think as long as the singer is approaching a work with love and respect, that it's fine to sing anything.
Does it feel different for you? You and I had a discussion about your Holocaust music, because I've been drawn to studying the Holocaust and to writing about it and to researching it and to singing works from it since I was a child. I mean, this is something that has always pulled me in. And I had a conversation at one point with somebody on Facebook who her premise was that I shouldn't sing Holocaust music because it wasn't something that was part of my history. And
I found that to be very surprising. Personally.
Yeah, I did too. But as I take a step back from it, is it different for someone who was not brought up in Jewish tradition, who was not around Jewish culture? I mean, I was around Jewish culture, but I wasn't raised into Jewish culture. Is it different for me to sing Holocaust music than it is for me to sing the piece that you wrote that has the N-word in it?
Not necessarily, but it is, because the N-word is such a bad, horrible word, you have other considerations, I think in general, like I said, if you're a great artist, a great performer, and you're throwing yourself into the work, you should be able to tell anybody's story, because the point is to tell the story.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's my feeling. As I would never say that anyone who isn't Jewish shouldn't sing my, Holocaust music. I wouldn't say that. They might not sing it with quite the same rubato or whatever as somebody who grew up in that culture. I found that to be true, but that's just, that depends on the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So I always think, as a composer, I'm there to tell stories that interest me and to bring those to an audience. So I want as many people as possible to sing my music and to tell those stories.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I would like to say something that I've noticed about what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Because I was looking over my oeuvre of folk song settings that I have done. I've done it from Scotland, Venezuela, of course, a lot of Far East, and Middle East, East Indian. And I was noticing that I had never set a Black song, a Black spiritual or anything like that. And I realized that I felt funny about trying to do something like that. And I actually called up a bunch of Black musician friends that I had, and I said, how would you feel if I were to set a Negro spiritual? I felt like I needed to ask permission. And I noticed that every one of us have talked about referring to somebody else, referring to the people of that culture and asking where we fit in. And I think that's a very valuable way of looking, self-introspection before starting a project like that. I felt exactly like you, Stephanie, and I still haven't set a Black spiritual, even though I would love to. But in light of everything that was there, I felt like there's a sensitivity there, and that we're in a certain time in history where that sensitivity needs to be honored.
Yeah, I would say, I think probably that sensitivity probably has always needed to be honored. It just hasn't, it's now finally that it's becoming, 2020 really threw the gas on the flames of this issue. It's been an issue for a long time, but yeah, I think now more than ever, it's incumbent upon all of us to really approach what we do with sensitivity and with a sense of honor and respect. And I know as a young teacher, I guess I'm still kind of a young teacher, but when I was beginning my career as a teacher, when I was beginning my career as a teacher, I would assign spirituals all the time because they were easy to sing, and we taught at a private, a Baptist university. And so they were sacred songs and they were easy for beginners to sing. And it wasn't until several years in that I realized that's not really the purpose of these songs. They're not didactic, vocal, pedagogical pieces. There's so much more depth that I'm not paying respect to by doing that. And so I stopped assigning spirituals as just beginning songs and as pieces that are meant to like help vocal growth. And now I only assign those songs, or I only have my students sing those songs if I know that they are coming from a place of kind of knowing where that source material comes from, why they exist, what the purpose of those songs really is, and knowing that they vocally can do it justice. That's really not something that a beginner singer, I think, has the capacity to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that my view on how that all works, I honestly, I suppose I was appropriating those songs at that time.
How would you feel if you were assigning that song to a Black singer, a beginning Black singer?
honestly, I think I would, if they didn't have the understanding of it, I don't know that I necessarily would. If they didn't have their own understanding of what the history of that piece was and what the profundity and the responsibility of singing that music is, I don't know that I would.
I think as we have done Sing for Your Lives, and as we've delved more into our research and our understanding of the importance of music and why we sing and why we create, we understand more and more that it's about connection, and it's about honoring, and it's about building empathy and compassion and storytelling and holding up a mirror for our audiences. And I think just because we've had this conversation and we are similar in our beliefs about this, that if the purpose of the piece is so deeply connective and so deeply sharing a story, then it does that piece a disservice to treat it as a technical tool to get better at figuring out your voice or figuring out your alignment. I think the same is true of Holocaust music. I wouldn't give Holocaust music to someone who wasn't singing it to connect to the events and to the people who experienced that. So I think that's where I stand too on that. Yeah.
A question. I mean, isn't it possible that you can use it in the spiritual in multiple ways, that you could use it, both for when the student is skilled and has enough understanding to understand the background, but you can also use it to develop voice. Does it all have to be one thing at the start?
I was going to say, I totally hear what you're saying about not using it as, and I've said this too, in both teaching situations that I've worked in. So just for background, like one school that I worked at was very like Southern Baptist, predominantly white. And then I also worked at an HBCU. So both, religious institutions, but just coming from very different cultural context. And so, at a PWI, I would have those thoughts of like, okay, I don't want to get into the position of using African-American music as the didactic tool, or because it seems easier, or even like in a choral situation, I don't want to, throw in the Moses Hogan at the end because it's fluff or filler and it's a feel-good number to have at the end of the concert. But then I would go to an HBCU, for example, and be dealing with kids who maybe didn't have the same resources or opportunities for musical study growing up. And so they're coming into this field not really feeling like there's a place for them. Like maybe their background is, in the church, or they haven't seen examples of themselves represented on a classical stage. And so in those moments, it's great to have that repertoire that you can pull from and say, here's something that you may have heard before, right? And so here's a means of cultural expression that makes sense to you and that you can identify with, but here's how it's been treated differently musically, and then kind of use it as a stepping stone into further musical study, or even to be able to say like, hey, I did a hip hop opera once, like there's a place for you. Like we can find ways to integrate whatever artistic expression means for you and your culture, and use that to integrate and then start to really build those bridges like you were referring to earlier.
Sorry, I took the hip hop opera off of your bio. I had to I picked some out. There's plenty of good things in there.
We are, just for our audience to know, we are fully into question 2, which was, are there songs that should be reserved for performance by a specific demographic? Are there demographics that should be excluded from performing certain music? So we've
sort of morphed our way into that already.
Which is fantastic. It's kind of evolved into that.
And I think spirituals are really the one that most people think about when with a question like this. Like that's sort of especially in the last, I guess, from my vantage point, that's been the topic of discussion for the last year or so, a couple years, that's the African-American spirituals is really where that comes into play. But are there songs besides that? Are there other genres or songs from other cultures that might warrant discussion around that same question?
Lori?
I would think that there's some sort of self-selectivity, for an artist, that if an artist feels drawn to something and is going to do a great job, that they should go for it. and if they don't feel comfortable, I think that they probably wouldn't want to present that repertoire. So I think there's some degree of selectivity that comes from the artist themselves, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We had a student, Grace, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I know that we've been approaching this from a very Western, white-centered former colonial, or still maintaining some aspect of colonialism, kind of a culture. But just hypothetically, there are animosities, or there's things of places of friction that may not involve the Western world at all.
Oh, certainly.
I mean, so we're talking about Jewish Israel and Palestine. You could even talk about Ethiopia and right now I can't think of the other country that they were at war with. I mean, but yeah. What I'm trying to say is, I know that we are grappling with centuries of mindless kind of taking it for granted that the Western world was superior. But I mean, when you talk about tourism, or are you a tourist or are you a visitor? I know that there are things that need to be looked at, particularly when you are in a whole different other part of the world, and that there is a kind of a sensitivity that many of us don't know anything about, or only know about in a very vague way. And I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah,
certainly.
That's
Shanelle.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say that reminds me of last year when I was working on a new art song that I'd never performed before, but it was a Russian setting of a Negro lullaby. And so, just thinking about that opportunity to sort of create connections between artists. So I reached out to a Russian friend of mine, obviously for help with the language and understanding the context that composer was writing in and that time period. And we were able to have these conversations about, viewing her view of the dynamic between like African-American people in this country, but through her lens and how it was taught to them in like a Russian school system. And so it was really interesting to all of a sudden not have to think about it from that Western perspective. And she was like, it's just the N-word, but like, we don't mean anything by it. Like, it just is what it is. Like, that's just our word for it. And I'm not trying to be derogatory in any way. And it was just kind of like this like mind-blowing moment for me to sort of have to explore two different cultures through that musical lens. So yeah, it was really interesting. But I think if we exclude people from singing certain repertoire, then we don't get to have those sort of experiences with one another.
Right. And there is that element of connotation versus denotation, and the culture into which the piece was written being different from the culture that we're experiencing right now in many cases. And so understanding the context that was implied by the composer versus what is going to be understood by the audience, and then sort of playing this game of like figuring out, juggling which of those we should serve most honestly.
Yeah, I was going to say we had a student that she was working on what was the song?
I don't remember what it was called.
How Come Me Here? Lord, How Come Me Here? And she said she heard it. She heard the Kathleen Battle recording of it. And she's like, oh my gosh, I have to sing that, but I don't know if I should. I don't know if I can. And her voice teacher was like, she heard her sing it, just was messing around trying to imitate what she heard. And she's like, you have to sing this. You're doing such an amazing job with it. And so she came in, we had never heard her sing it at all. She came into her jury and just knocked us all dead.
There was a this is a jury. Like, this is a bunch of people with pens writing down how many oscillations per second people are singing. Like, we're testing her, and I didn't write a word.
Nobody wrote anything,
and we were all sobbing by the end of it.
And she told the story. Lori, this goes back to your point about that it's our job to be storytellers, and that's something we talk about a lot. And she told this story so effectively that, I mean, I was just a sloppy mess at the end of her singing this song, and it was a cappella. She didn't have accompaniment at all, and like, how can you not sing? How can you not tell that story when you do that good of a job at it, regardless of who you are? So that's, that was, I guess, my, I don't know, I hate to call it a data point, but like, that's a perspective that's like, okay, if somebody can sing a piece of music that moves people to tears and makes you think about, okay, what was that person's experience? Because that's what it did. It made me think about the depth of pain and suffering that people endured. And I mean, is that not the purpose of what we do as artists? So at that point, does it matter who you are if you're singing the piece?
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter if you can put it over. That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
The other thought that struck me about going back to the conversation that I had with the woman about me not singing Holocaust music as someone who didn't grow up in Greek I did grow up in Greek culture, which is similar actually, but who didn't grow up in Jewish culture, is I lost it. I just lost my thought. It's totally gone.
Could you identify with the
oh yeah, I was gonna say, sorry, I have 2 children. I haven't slept in 9 years, so. But when I step onto a stage to sing Holocaust music, no one really knows what my background is. If I step onto the stage to sing, a cycle of spirituals, everyone in the audience knows immediately that I'm not Black. Everybody knows immediately that that is not part of my past. And how does that play into it? Or does it? Or do I trust that the people who know me know that I have always fought for equality and justice? Or is that enough? Am I doing a disservice, And so it is a challenge. And it is, I think the spiritual thing is a little bit different because of that, the immediate understanding that white singers didn't grow up in this culture.
Well, and also that white colonialism or the oppressor culture, like right. We represent the culture that historically oppressed African Americans. And so that's, I don't know. But I don't necessarily want this to be like how do we white people do this right?
Exactly. It's tricky. It's a tricky conversation. Okay, so moving on to the third question. Can songs of ethnic oppression or hardship be tools for engendering empathy and compassion in performers of differing ethnicities? Lori, let's open it to you first this time.
Yeah, I would say absolutely, but not only performers. I mean, I think you have to consider the audience too. And I think the whole point of, at least when I'm writing Holocaust-themed song cycles, is to honor those who are dead and to tell their stories. And it's not only for the performers that you are, developing empathy, but anyone who's hearing it. So I think I think music has the ability also to tell horrific stories in a way that is sometimes more palatable than just reading about it, because you have music to sort of cushion the blow, but also emphasize the blow. I always think of I don't like to say it because I love my poets, but I think of a poem as sort of black and white, and I think of a song as color. It's everything is illuminated and magnified.
I love that.
Yeah. But that's not to insult any of my poets because they're wonderful. But, I think that when you're dealing with such horrible subjects like the death of a child or, the Holocaust, music can, it intensifies it, yet it softens the blow of receiving the information. And I think it's a good way to get information into people, That's been my experience.
Great answer. I love that. When we were discussing doing this specific webinar, my only sort of reference point was, okay, what if a man were singing a song cycle about what it's like to be a woman and all of the struggles that we go through, or, about just any of the struggles we go through, that they can't understand firsthand. And I'm thinking about sitting in an audience and watching somebody on stage that I don't know doing it. And it felt sort of strange for a moment to put myself in those shoes. But then I started thinking about my husband, who I know has always been, all about equality and women's rights and supporting people in their, just supporting whoever is the best person for the job and making sure that he uplifts everyone. And I would be honored by that. I would be honored by him singing that, because I know that he has dedicated himself to equality and to justice and to love and to connection. So thanks for all those things also. Shanelle, how about you? What is your thought on this one?
This one is kind of tricky for me, honestly, because of course, as an artist, I absolutely think that we can use the arts as a vehicle and a tool for fostering that empathy towards people of different ethnicities. But then I always come back to a place of sometimes this music, whether it be African-American music or if we're talking about music from the Holocaust, I think sometimes we're so hyper-focused on what it means or what it represents for us as performers to sing it. And we forget that for the people it belongs to, it's also a means of processing traumatic events sometimes. And so I think sometimes there's a needed balance between not always using music to teach and just letting it exist in the way that it's meant to exist, and just letting it be that means of expression and just kind of being present in that moment. If someone walks away with something from it, then great. But then sometimes as an audience member, it's nice to just kind of be in that and process whatever it was originally intended to do,
So would you say that, are there people who shouldn't sing music that's of a different culture, or is your premise that people should, what's the word? I don't know, sort of yield to the meaning of the music? What does that mean in practice?
What are the implications for what you're saying?
I think it depends. I think it comes down to a lot of factors. I think about, the Porgy and Bess debate all the time. And people are like, oh, well, it was the composer's intent that it was only supposed to be sung by a certain group of people. And so if your intent was to be able to provide an opportunity for people that were normally excluded from the performance space, and that's what you want, and that's why you wrote that selection, okay, great. We should honor that, because in doing so, you were honoring a specific culture. And then, for other works, for other repertoire choices, for me personally, matter of fact, I think I can find it real quickly. Hold on. There were certain questions that I kind of go through a checklist of, is this appropriation if I do this? So just questions to consider. Does the appropriator or does the performer seem to understand the complexity of your own relationship to the culture that you're borrowing from? And then does your performance of the music steer attention towards the source, or does it divert attention from the source? So just looking at everything on a case-by-case basis and saying if I do this in this context with this audience, with all the research that I put into it, with all the back work that I've done to get to this moment, how is this going to be perceived? Am I profiting off this culture in some way? Is this a culture that still remains marginalized? And is this gonna uplift and amplify again? So just having those questions in mind for any performance that you do.
Yeah, I go ahead. Oh, Grace, sorry, go ahead.
I would like to ask everybody for some examples of cultural appropriation in classical music.
Yeah, I was just about to bring up something that we didn't really send out to you all. This just occurred to me. I had an online conversation with some people about this a while back, but I think probably the most atrocious example of cultural appropriation is minstrel songs, which we don't really. It doesn't get discussed a lot because they're not performed anymore, but they have still made it, they've maintained their way into popular culture in the form of children's songs. So, you know, like I've been working on the railroad is not really an innocent little kid's song the way that we all think it is. And there are so many examples of that. And so this discussion that I was having online was like, we should get rid of all of that stuff, erase all of that, cancel all of that from the repertoire that we teach little kids as, you know, part of their like nursery rhyme education, because it's just perpetuating this horrible tradition of those minstrel songs. And then, so what I was trying to figure out for myself and just kind of chatting back and forth with people was, well, yeah, certainly we don't want to like do minstrel shows by any stretch of the imagination. We don't want to perform these songs, but I think it's important that we know that they existed, because I didn't even know that that was a tradition that existed until I was in grad school. I didn't know what those were. I didn't know the history of any of that stuff. And then we were at a garage sale, I think. We found this a book of Stephen Foster songs, and it had stories of all these songs, but this book was published in like 1930. And so it was still like, these are great songs that you should sing, and here's what they're about, and why like slavery was really not all that bad, and all. It's like it was horrifying to read this, but that's a part of our history. At the same time, it's not a good part of our history, but it existed, and it's something that I think we need to be aware of, so that we don't repeat that. You know, I think having that example of what appropriation really looks like at its worst level is important, so that we know how to recognize that when it pops up in other realms and other ways.
Where would you put the Mikado?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, I actually just I read an article that this woman was talking about Madama Butterfly being this hyper racist work that needs to not be performed anymore because it's about oppressing Asian culture by white men. And I had never thought of it that way before. I'm still not sure I'm like on board with everything that she was saying, but it definitely opened up a new perspective that I had not considered. I don't know. I mean, I think Mikado, that's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer to it.
And I also think that humor and comedy bears a certain look at. I mean, I shared something with Graham on Facebook just yesterday, and it was these 4 very, very funny white guys that did a whole. They danced and they sang and they got dressed up in all different kinds of ways as a review of ethnomusicology. They did the Greek culture, they did Japanese, they did Germany. They made fun of it all, and they were very funny. And I know I asked Graham what he thought about that, and well, why didn't you tell them what you thought about it?
I gave a really overly academic response. But they did. I mean, I think I said that it was. You asked, is this closer to appreciation or to appropriation? And it was. I mean, it was a comedic stereotyping of like, I think there were like 7 or 8 different cultures.
Oh yes, it was very stereotyped.
But what I settled on was like, okay, well, they obviously had to do a lot of research. Like they had the actual traditional garb from each culture. They had to figure out what are the actual dance moves that are at least going to resemble what this dance would look like. What's the music that goes along with it? And it was funny, but it was also like, okay, they had to had to do their research here. They had to figure out how. I mean, it was clear that they were appreciating what they were making fun of at the same time, and they weren't claiming it for themselves.
They were mocking it.
That's true. That's true.
They were yeah. I mean, and so that's, I don't know. Like, how does humor?
I was going to
Yeah,
say,
go
that
ahead.
for me, then the question would be like whether or not the viewership walks away with a sense of like, oh, okay, like these cultures were mocked in this setting, and so like, how that's funny, or like, did they actually gain anything valuable about all those cultures after having viewed it? So like, it comes down to like that perception of what am I walking away with?
Yeah. It kind of reminded me of like South Park. Like, nobody gets off the hook.
Everybody got skewed, right?
Everybody gets roasted a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Well, for our very last question, how can we best use music to uplift one another? Shanelle, let's start with you.
I often think about this as it relates to the teaching space. I am very fortunate and, being in a melting pot like New York City to begin with, but I have been very fortunate to work in voice studio environments that are very diverse. And so even though I personally am always looking at things through the lens of like, I as a Black woman, how do I feel about this? That's intersectionality, right? Like, as a Black woman, you feel one way, but as someone who has higher education, I might be swayed by this or that, or, growing up in the suburbs or living in the city or having access, whatever. So my opinion is swayed by lots of different factors, but I try to find opportunities to allow all those different student bodies to come together in a way using music as the tool for that. So even if I am, wanting to teach something that's from a culture that maybe I'm not very familiar with, that gives me an opportunity to say, okay, let's bring in someone else to do that and give you an opportunity to speak to them. Or how do I have a student in, my student body already who grew up in that culture? Like, can you speak to us about this? Can you be an authoritative presence on this? So I think it just gives us an opportunity to dismantle this sort of like power structure that says like, this culture is, the colonialized culture is the superior in their academic sense, and just say like, let's put everyone on a level playing field. Like, we can all bring something to the table. How can we share and learn and grow together artistically in this moment?
Awesome. Thank you. Let's go to Grace. What are your thoughts on this?
Would you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I will. It is, how can we best use music to uplift one another?
Oh, I think music is one of the best ways of uplifting one another. I mean, music is often totally irresistible. And I think that sometimes it opens up a whole world to the listener that didn't know that existed. It opens up our common humanity. It opens up the whole universal feeling of particularly rhythm. Boy, rhythm speaks to everybody on a very, very basic level. And I know that you've talked about it, particularly in the sense of vocal music, and even despite the different modes and all the different ways that we can approach music from other parts of the world and other cultures, that the words and the circumstances of song, the fact that a song always encapsulates a moment within a time and within a culture and within a place, that makes it universal. I just think music is the very best way to do that. Perhaps film as well.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Lori, what about you?
I would say the best way we can use music to uplift each other is by performing the music well. As a composer, to do your best to honor the words if you're writing vocal music, or if you're not writing vocal music, to make the very best composition you can, and for performers to bring it to life as if you were the composer, and to not to take things seriously, and to present things to the best of your ability, and not cheapen things.
Yeah. To pour yourself fully into it and sort of lend yourself to it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That was, I think, the goal that we were hoping to achieve when we were going to do this, the recital of African American composers' music, was basically to do that. And you know, I was going to do this set of H.T. Burleigh songs that I was really excited to do, because we don't really hear his art songs as much. We think of H.T. Burleigh's he's sort of the grandfather of you know, setting African American spirituals as art songs in sort of an art song style. But everybody knows, you know, the Burleigh book is all his spirituals. But then he's got this whole body of art songs aside from that are just incredible, and a totally different style of music. Nobody ever hears them, and they're just unreal gorgeous. And so it was exciting to sort of bring those out of the closet, you know, dust them off, and make more people aware that, hey, there's tons of music that never gets performed, or hardly ever gets performed, that needs to, because it's absolutely stunning. And so that was, you know, we were hoping to be sort of serving as an uplifting, as a means of uplifting people, as, you know, giving voice to the voiceless in a sense that way.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can still do it at some point.
Yes, hopefully. Well,
any
final thoughts?
Thoughts or comments that we haven't touched on so far?
All right. Well, thank you all so much for participating in this conversation. We are so grateful, and we look forward to having more of these conversations, and to hopefully inspiring more people to have these conversations. They're really wonderful. Absolutely. We do these panel discussions at the final Sunday of every month. So check back for the next one we do next month, and we'll keep on keeping on. If you want to learn more about what we do, visit singforyourlives.com. If you want to learn more about what our lovely panelists are doing, you can visit the websites that we mentioned at the beginning of this discussion. So thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you.